Shlomo from Tur, Lebanon, Shlomo from Mount Lebanon. It is hard to imagine Lebanese architecture without the Trifora, the triple bay or the triple arches. What are these triple arches, the Trifora? What is its meaning? On our journey to visit Lebanese architecture, we will go through 4 sources. The Codex Rabulensis, or the Rabula book of the Gospels, dated 586. 2. The manuscript of Maronite Patriarch Stephanos Douaihi, who died in 1704. 3. The Sugito of Edessa, meaning the Syriac hymn of Edessa, dated from the 6th century. And 4. The thesis of Volkmar Ganshorn, Le Tapis Chrétien Oriental, the Christian carpet, especially the carpet with the lily flower. When people look at Lebanese architecture, they always notice the triple arches or triple bay. The most prominent feature of this kind of architecture. It has been said that Lebanese Prince Fakhreddin II imported this model from Italy when he came back from his exile in 1618. The reason for this superficial explanation is that everything in Lebanon tends to be explained through Arabic culture. But if we search in our Syriac heritage, we find much deeper meanings for things. Our Syriac heritage contains a great book of the Gospels known as the Codex Rabulensis. It was composed under the supervision of the monk Rabula in 586. It shows us the triple arches of our Lebanese architecture with the exact same proportions and details. The thin, slender columns are identical to those on the Lebanese triple arches and have nothing in common with the proportions of the Greek, Roman, or Byzantine architecture. During the reign of Prince Fakhreddin II, the Maronite Church started a renaissance, initiated by the foundation of the Maronite College in Rome in 1584. This renaissance was boosted by the stability, security, and prosperity provided by the prince's model of governance. Scholar Aslimani took the Codex Rabulensis from Lebanon to Florence and started studying it and analyzing it. Maronite Patriarch George Amira wrote a book on architecture for the prince. This intellectual prosperity with the Maronite Church was combined to the economic growth. Images from the past made their reappearance in the Lebanese landscape. It is Maronite Patriarch Stephanos Douaihi who in the 17th century gave us the meaning of the triple arches. He says they are the light of the Holy Trinity. Many scholars would say this is a later explanation, not necessarily objective, which is why we will also call for another evidence that is from the 6th century, the Sugito of Edessa, that describes Hagia Sophia, the Cathedral of Edessa. This basilica is also contemporary of Hagia Sophia of Constantinople, and from the same period, the 6th century. A Sugito is a Syriac hymn. It was translated by Dupont-Sommer. It uses the same description provided by Patriarch Stephanos Douaihi 10 centuries later. And it says, "Their light is the light of the Holy Trinity." We actually know that in the Byzantine Empire it was customary to have 2 architects working on a monument. One of them was responsible for the technical approach, whereas the other concentrated on the symbolism. In Edessa's basilica, the architects were Asaph and Edai. This symbolism made of the monument a sort of microcosm, representing space, time, and spirituality. The cupola was the representation of the Orbis Romanus, the entire universe. This is the first factor, space. The 40 windows at its base symbolized the 40 centuries, the integritas saecularum, the integrity of time. This is our second factor. Under them, we always notice the triple arches or triple bay. They are the representation of the Holy Trinity as mentioned by the Syriac hymn of Edessa in the 6th century and by the Maronite Patriarch in the 17th century. This is our third factor, spirituality. Again, we find this triple bay in many Maronite churches, palaces, or simple houses. In Lebanese architecture, there is very little ornamentation. The feature that is mostly used is the lily flower. This example is in Shueya. The lilies are on the central arch. In Mayfouz monastery, however, the lily is on the column's capital. Again, in the Belama Palace in Cornael, they are on the arch but oriented upwards. Here, a series of lilies at Kaslik, and the same at Babdet, and a detail of lily stones. Here at the Donna Maria Palace in Beirut, we watch the lilies on arches as well as on bullseye windows. Often there is no lily sculpted in the stones, but this important symbol is still there. It is found in the woodworks of the triple bay. It is always incorporated to the Gothic design as seen in this example. And again in this other example in Hadad, North Lebanon. What does this omnipresent feature mean? What is the intended message? To answer this question, we go to our fourth source mentioned earlier, the Armenian carpets analyzed by Volkmar Ganshorn. This author was often told that the carpets he was mentioning were Turkish carpets for Muslim prayer. Yet he was finally able to prove the Christian origin of that art thanks to the gauzy carpet of the Berlin Museum. Because this piece presents clearly an Armenian inscription mentioning Saint Hripsimi. It is also dated from the year 1651. Next to the inscription and to the date appears a second frame with the lily flowers. Volkmar Ganshorn tells us this is not, as people assume, a Turkish tulip. It is a lily of the Lilium candidum species, the white lily, that has its origins in the Lebanese antiquity, he says. For Phoenicians, it was as important as the cedar. For Christians, it symbolizes the grace of God. What is the grace of God doing here? In Hadad, North Lebanon, the lily appears on the arch next to the snake of the capital. For Christian artistic tradition, the serpent has fallen Adam, but the grace of God brought him salvation. And if we look again at the gauzy carpet, we notice the duplication of the columns. Jules Leroy made the same observation while studying the Syriac manuscripts. He says this duplication is the simplification of the perspective. It is a two-dimensional image of the church's nave that leads us to Jesus Christ and to his kingdom. So to summarize the entire message, the triple bay is the light of the Holy Trinity that leads us to heaven through the Church of Jesus Christ. But to be able to enter, we need the grace of God, symbolized here by the lily flower. Armenian and Syriac artists created a two-dimensional interpretation of the nave. But what is mostly amazing is to see Lebanese architects adopting this 2D representation in their three-dimensional work. This is a very interesting example in Amshit, in which the architect was inspired from the 2D representations of the Christian nave. And most importantly, we can see all the elements defined by Wagner Ganshorn. The triple arches of the Holy Trinity, the duplicated columns of the Church of Christ, and of course the lilies for the grace of God. The concept of salvation was not just an unconscious act for Lebanese artists or masons. Soteriology, meaning the theology of salvation, was at the center of Christian Maronite art, as we can see in this monastery of Our Lady of Mayfu. If we take a closer view at its triple bay, we notice it contains Syriac inscriptions. And while we get even closer, we start to read under the cross, Lo purkono elo baslivo ulo haye elo be. There is no salvation but by the cross, and no life but in it. The architect and mason made here a clear evocation of the concept of salvation. The people were always influenced by their church, their faith, values, and spirituality that left its traces all over their art and architecture. But the influence of the church was even more direct. The monastery was the school, the university, and the hospital. It organized agriculture, industry, and construction. Here is a photograph showing the construction site of a house in Mount Lebanon in the late 19th century. If we stare closer and analyze its details, we notice the architect standing on the right side supervising the works. And this architect is a priest. Shlomo from Tul Lebanon, Shlomo from Mount Lebanon.